You are listening to Chapter 3, Lesson 2 of Form 3 Cameroon History. Cameroon General Education. Narrated by Wacheseh Academy. The course of the war in Cameroon. The German forces in Cameroon were commanded by Colonel Zimmermann. In August 1914, the French and Belgian colonial forces led by General Aymerich attacked the Germans in the south and east. The British Nigerian forces commanded by Lieutenant Colonel Maclean suffered heavy casualties in an attempt to retain control of Garoua in August 1914. Maclean lost his life. The Germans again defeated the British colonial forces' attempted capture of Mora in August 1914. The British Nigerian forces led by Colonel Carter suffered heavy casualties in the Battle of Nsanakang in September 1914. A combined Anglo-French force was formed called the West African Expeditionary Force WAEF, and was commanded by General Charles Dobell, as an English officer. WAEF proved too strong for the German forces commanded by Colonel Zimmermann. Douala was captured in September 1914. The Germans were forced to escape inland to Idia. The Allied powers intensified offensive on the north. Garoua was captured on June 11, 1915, Ngoundara on June 29, 1915, Banyo on November 1915. In January 1916, Yaoundé was captured. Charles Atangana fled with some of his Dub chiefs and Germans to Spanish Guinea, and by February 16, 1916, most of the German forces left Cameroon for Equatorial Guinea. On February 18, 1916, the Germans were defeated in the Battle of Mora. Von Raben surrendered on behalf of the Germans. Mora was captured, bringing an end to the war in February 1916. The role played by Cameroonians in the First World War. Cameroonians played the role of fighters. They fought in most of the battles that led to the defeat of the Germans. They played the role of spies. Most of the native tribes hated German rule and, as such, provided Allied forces with useful information. They played the role of carriers. They transported war materials, food, water to the battlefield. They supplied food. They helped in the movement of Allied troops. They served as general laborers. They served as interpreters and translators to the Allied power. They provided finances through high indirect and direct taxes paid. They also helped to spread anti-German propaganda, which weakened German support popularity. Why it took so long for the Germans to be defeated? The Germans had mastery of the terrain than the European Allied forces. The Germans had better adoption of the climate than the British and French. The Germans had adapted better to the insects and tropical diseases than the British forces. They had domestic support of traders, planters, and technicians in the role of the territory who provided military and economic support. The Germans had well-trained and stronger African soldiers than the hastily recruited Allied forces. Some tribes in Cameroon supported the Germans, like the Iwando. Some Fulbe villages in the north fought against the Allied troops using their local spears and poisoned arrows. The Germans had external support, especially ammunition smuggled from Spanish Guinea, which reinforced their military power. Transport difficulties, especially rivers, etc., delayed rapid war actions. The German forces were more united, disciplined than the Allied forces. The Allied powers underestimated the Germans when the war started. Why the Germans were defeated in 1916? The Allied powers had more troops than the Germans. The Allied powers had more reserve forces in the colonies for reimbursement. The Allied powers had more weapons than the Germans. The Allied powers could easily reinforce their arms than the Germans. The British naval power enjoyed superiority over the Germans. Cameroon was surrounded by the British and French colonies, which made it very difficult for the Germans to bring reinforcement. The Allied powers had more domestic support from the natives than the Germans. The Allied powers attacked the Germans on 4 fronts in Cameroon: the south, north, east, and west. This was too difficult for the Germans to withstand. The loss of strategic territory to the Allied powers, like Douala in September 1914, Garoua in 1915, and Yaoundé in 1916, demoralized the Germans. The Germans were fighting other severe battles outside Cameroon in Togoland, Tanganyika, etc., which exhausted their finances, arms, and soldiers. By 1916, the German forces were exhausted to continue the war. By 1916, some of the German forces had escaped to Spanish Guinea, which weakened their military power.